From sexual scandals in Hollywood to more in the NFL, protests to ex-gay testimonies.
It's time for The Line of Fire with your host, activist, author, international speaker, and theologian, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Michael Brown is the director of the Coalition of Conscience and president of Fire School of Ministry. Get into The Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. That's 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
We are going to wade right into the controversies today, not to stir up further controversy, but to bring some light, to bring some clarity. Welcome to the broadcast. This is Michael Brown. Thanks for joining us today. Phone number the same as always, 866-348-7884, 866-34-TRUTH. If you'd like to call, comment, get involved in the discussion. Let's start with Hollywood. Harvey Weinstein, very, very powerful Hollywood executive, now fired by his own company for alleged sexual scandals, for being somewhat of a sexual predator. Now different actresses coming forward saying, yes, he did this to me, yes, he did this. And I'm not here to condemn him. I don't think he's a believer. I have no knowledge that he is. I want him to find the Lord and find repentance and wholeness there. I'm not here to condemn him or attack him. But what concerns me about all this is that, number one, these things, these alleged sexual scandals were known for years and years and years, and basically were tolerated or swept under the rug until 1, 2, 3 prominent actresses, others began to come forward and say, this happened. And it was too much to deny. Different people with platforms began to announce this, too much to deny. The problem is that this was swept under the rug for so long. And here's my bigger issue. And we'll get into this more as the show progresses. Here's my bigger issue. Hollywood itself is so grounded and founded on sexual exploitation. From what I understand, these kinds of things were fairly common. And for years, if some young actress wanted to get ahead, she'd be expected to compromise certain values with certain executives or certain people. And then how are you going to get ahead? If you're attractive, well, you've got to show more flesh and you've got to present the sexual side of yourself. And this is what's going to sell. And yes, plenty of actresses go along with this willingly, but that's also the industry. And then there are the accounts of childhood actors who talk about being sexually abused as children, as minors, not just teenagers, but even younger, and say this has been swept under the rug, and major names and big players are involved with this, and yet it continues to happen. Now, God knows everything going on. And again, my purpose is not to say you're all wicked sinners, you're going to hell. We're all going to hell as wicked sinners without God's mercy. All right? That's not my purpose here. My purpose is to say there is hypocrisy. There is hypocrisy in the outrage because surely many of the people who are outraged today were fully aware of the abuses. And I have little question that some of those who are expressing outrage today themselves were engaged in various types of sexploitation. And that, again, Hollywood itself, the movies, the things that sell, sex sells, right? Attractive young lady, she is going to be exploited to the max for whatever can bring in an audience. This is the way it works. This is what Hollywood makes its money, and not all of its money. And there are gifted people in Hollywood, and gifted actors and actresses and producers and directors and screenwriters and video people. I acknowledge that. Creative people, I acknowledge all that. But the issue is you have a sexploitational culture now getting outraged that one of the major executives is allegedly a sexual predator. Why the surprise? Why the outrage? Doesn't this stuff go on behind the scenes all the time? Isn't this part and parcel of what the Hollywood industry operates on? And isn't this part and parcel of the larger culture of sexploitation? We'll be right back. I'm going to talk about the NFL. It's been a beautiful beautiful spring day in the suburbs of Pennsylvania on this Thursday, June 7th, 1961. You just got home from work and your wife's almost finished preparing one of her typically delicious dinners. Tonight is TV night and everybody's ready to enjoy Ozzie and Harriet and Leave It to Beaver. Of course, a live in-person show is incredible. Who could forget your family outing 2 weeks ago when you all drove into Manhattan and saw My Fair Lady on Broadway? But TV has its own unique appeal, especially with shows like Lassie and Andy Griffith and Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color and Father Knows Best and the Flintstones. And they're all on at night so the whole family can enjoy them together. Well, on this lovely spring night, you're a bit more tired than you realize, fighting to stay awake through the current Beaver episode, even though it's a bit more suspenseful than normal. But this night, you doze off just before the end of the program, and when you wake up a few minutes later, everything's changed. Well, the TV's still there, except it's giant now, flat, hanging on a wall, exploding with colors, and instead of the smiling Cleaver family, it's... No, this can't be real. A nude couple going on their first date? What's happening? In a panic, you look for another channel, quickly figuring out how to use the newfangled remote control you now hold in your hands, but your eyes can't believe what you're seeing. Did I wake up in hell? But something else is different when you look around the room. You're the only one there. Your 15-year-old son is out with his best friend Robbie, who used to be called Robin, back when he was a girl, along with Robbie's 17-year-old brother. They went to see a new movie in the Hostel series where people are tortured to death and mutilated for fun, but hey, at least he's out of the house. It's better than playing Grand Theft Auto for 6 straight hours where your boy's raping women and killing cops on his video screen. Suddenly, you wake up with a start. This was all a dream. With relief, you look around at your wonderful family smiling at their dad who fell asleep in the middle of TV night, and you think to yourself, thank God, this was only a bad dream. There's no way America or my family could ever look like that.
Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown. Get into the line of fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
All right, back to the NFL. A good friend of mine, a black brother, sent me a clip by The Daily Show's Trevor Noah explaining the frustration that many black Americans feel when white Americans tell them when they can and cannot protest. And I watched the clip, and I was somewhat surprised and even disappointed, because Trevor Noah is obviously a very sharp guy. He's funny. He's got a brilliant use of sarcasm. He's cutting with his humor, but he's certainly a sharp thinking guy. He's taking issue with comments made by Steve Mnuchin, basically saying it's wrong to protest the anthems, and he takes issue with this. I want you to hear what Trevor Noah had to say.
He's not against the players protesting. He just doesn't like it when they do it on the field. You know, when everyone's watching. Yeah, do it somewhere else. Can you imagine Mnuchin giving that advice to Rosa Parks? He would just be like, hey, Rosa, why are you protesting on the bus? Huh? People have places to be. Take the bus to your house, sit down on your couch, and protest from home. Boom, racism solved. It's solved.
Oh, okay, Trevor, you're obviously missing the point here. She was protesting having to give up her seat on the bus to a white person. That's what she was protesting. She was protesting that thing. That's why she did it on the bus. You didn't have cameras on the bus. You didn't have media watching the bus. You didn't have some big scene on the bus and the whole world watching, and that's why she chose that place to protest. No, there were just passengers on the bus, and she gets arrested for it, and then it gets into the news, and civil rights leaders then used her as a good representation of the segregation that black Americans faced. But that's the thing she was protesting, having to give up her seat on the bus. This was not something staged so that other people would see it with a maximum audience. If that was the case, go somewhere else where cameras are going to be. No, she was protesting that thing. Whereas the NFL Players Union said, no one is disrespecting the flag, and no one is protesting the flag or disrespecting the country. So the reason the players were kneeling in the first place, they're now saying it's not disrespecting the flag, but they did it in that setting, not just because there are cameras there. These are NFL players. They have cameras on them a lot. They can easily get an audience. No, listen to what Colin Kaepernick said, the one who began the protest. I am not going to stand up to show pride in a flag for a country that oppresses black people and people of color. He chose that because that's what he was protesting. And here, I've encouraged NFL players, and dialogue with one NFL player about this, not to protest at that time for strategic purposes. I'm not telling you what you can and can't do as people of color or American citizens or football players. I'm simply saying it's not a good strategic protest. Why? Because it gives the appearance that it is disrespecting the flag. It gives the appearance it is disrespecting veterans, black and white and others who have sacrificed for America, who have given their blood for America. It gives that impression, and it draws hostility towards them instead of solidarity. There are plenty of other ways you can protest. Marches work very effectively. There are other ways. Gather players together, make a joint statement, do something in the inner city, announce a media event, get key owners together, put out statements about where the racial injustice is or where the oppression is or where things are wrong. There are many good ways to protest. Martin Luther King and other civil rights leaders had to look for the right ways to protest. And in fact, Rosa Parks, as you all know, Rosa Parks was not the first one to refuse to give up her seat. There was another younger black woman, and she refused to give up her seat, and civil rights leaders were going to make her the face of the cause against segregation, the case against segregation. Then they found out she was pregnant out of wedlock and thought that would not work well. All we're talking about is being strategic here. And Rosa Parks did what she did because that's what she was protesting. So if you agree with Colin Kaepernick and you want to protest the flag and what it stands for, then go ahead and do it, but you're going to draw more opposition than solidarity. It's going to hurt the cause. If it's not about the flag, like the NFL Players Union said, and as one of my friends on the NFL said that the players are not protesting the flag, then that's the wrong time to do it. So again, Trevor Noah takes issue with this idea of there's an appropriate place and not appropriate place. And he brings up probably the worst example he could have brought up. Back to Trevor Noah.
You know what? So the Trump administration is okay with protesting, right? They're okay. As long as it's on your own time. Unless you're ESPN commentator Jamel Hill criticizing the president on your private Twitter feed, then that's a fireable offense too, right?
Worst possible example. Number one, ESPN, now infamously liberal, fires Curt Schilling, a baseball hero and legend, fires Curt Schilling. Why? Because on his private Facebook page, or on his personal Facebook page, he posts a meme taking issue with a man who's obviously a male wanting to use the ladies' bathroom, and because that would upset LGBT activists and their allies, he was fired for doing this, and he was told that the commentators are not to engage in political statements. He was fired for this. Jamel Hill calls Donald Trump a white supremacist and is not fired for that, but she's reprimanded because ESPN has said, we do not want you getting involved in political statements. If you're a sportscaster, that's who you are. That's what we want you talking about. So she's reprimanded, whereas Curt Schilling was fired for a far less offense, all right? And then 2 weeks later, she gets upset and she tweets again, and this time she's given a 2-week suspension. She had been warned this is a policy for everyone. So a white guy, Curt Schilling, is fired even though he's a baseball legend for something he posted on Facebook. Jamel Hill now, second time around that she breaks the policy, which has been recently reinforced by ESPN. She only gets suspended for 2 weeks. It looks like if there's anything unequal, it's the treatment of white conservatives. But then again, do I even have a right to speak? Because after all, I am a white conservative. According to Simone Sanders on CNN, really, I can't even weigh in on this. Listen to this heated discussion.
White people do not get to tell black folks or anybody else what is an acceptable form
It's called,
of protest.
not everything's about race, Simone. Not everything is about
maybe
race.
not for you.
Some of it is about. Some of it is actually about.
Okay, so how about this? On the issue of messaging,
it's absolutely about race.
All right, so let me just get this right. I cannot give recommendation to black friends, colleagues, or others and say, I don't think this works well. I think this works better. If you have a message to get out, here's a better way to do it, because you don't want to be perceived as unpatriotic or ungrateful to the sacrifice that others have made for our freedoms, the freedoms that we're all trying to enjoy. And if some have more freedoms than others, let's address that. Let's address that. Let's do our best to bring this to the surface. No, I'm not the spokesman for racial inequality in America. I'm a white conservative. I'm not the spokesman for that. Let those who've suffered more, let them come to the forefront and let me help get their message out. Absolutely. But to tell me that I don't have the right to comment on it, what kind of nonsense is that? Let's go a little further. When Vice President Mike Pence went to the Indianapolis Colts San Francisco 49ers game, and when about 20 49ers players knelt during the anthem, and he got up and walked out after that, said, I'm not going to be part of something where the flag is disrespected, there were black players, like San Francisco 49ers player Eric Reed, who took issue. Well, hang on. What gives a white man no right to say when a black man can protest, but a black man can tell a white man when he can protest? That Eric Reed has the right to tell the vice president that he shouldn't protest? Well, only one side gets to protest. Only one side gets to say when it's right to protest. This is bogus. So look, here's the bottom line. Do we want America to be great? Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, whoever we are. Do we want America to be a great country? Yeah, I think we all do. Do we want America to be a country that's really a country of justice and equality? I believe so. Trevor Noah from South Africa, me from America. I believe we both want America to be a great country, a country of freedom, a country of justice. We'll obviously have different perspective on what's right and wrong, but we want that. So rather than smashing and bashing each other, let's have constructive conversations based on facts, based on truth, not just based on emotionally laden and emotionally charged talking points that miss the point entirely. Let's put truth on the table, and let's do it in a constructive way for the good of everyone. Is that too much to ask? All right, friends, when we come back, feel free to weigh in on my comments. Feel free to interact with me. I absolutely welcome that. I want to go back to Hollywood for a few more minutes and our sexually charged culture. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about hypocrisy and to what extent we in the church are complicit in that. And someone said, wait a second. If you voted for Donald Trump, then you're the worst hypocrite of all because he's a sexual predator himself. Oh, fair question. We'll put it on the table when we come back right here on The Line of Fire.
Shake the nation, change the world.
You don't need a PhD to know that our world is in serious trouble. All it takes is one glance at your social media feed to see that we're at a critical time, not just in our nation's history, but in world history. And this generation of believers is facing an unprecedented barrage of attacks against the truth of the gospel. And they're coming from 1,000 different directions. If ever there was a time for the body to speak out, to raise a righteous standard, and to be a beacon of hope in the midst of a sea of despair, now is that time. Through preaching and teaching and radio and writing and social media, God's given us a voice. I mean, by His grace, many, many lives have been impacted for the gospel around the world. So it's for that reason I want to take you behind the scenes here at Ask Dr. Brown, let you know about some of the exciting projects we're involved in, and share with you how you can help us fulfill this great mandate from the Lord in this battle for the hearts and minds of a whole generation. Over the last several months, our studio has undergone a massive overhaul. We have put thousands of dollars into revamping what is basically our command central. This studio is not just used to produce the Line of Fire radio broadcast, but we also produce in this studio hundreds of YouTube videos that you see, as well as our media for other ministry outlets like God TV and NRB TV. So this studio is really the heartbeat of everything, all the media that we produce at Ask Dr. Brown. And now we are ready to step into a whole new realm, and we can do it with your help. So I'm asking you today, to partner with us. Through your generous donations, we can fulfill this mandate from the Lord in this battle for the hearts and minds of a whole generation. And you can help amplify my voice. Friends, stand with us today. Together, we're making a difference.
Cleansing flame, send the fire.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Welcome back, friends, to The Line of Fire. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution for sure. Here to help articulate what is right, what is wrong, hopefully to be a voice for you so we can express things that are on your heart, on your mind. 866-348-7884. Again, one more word about the protests. If the players are meaning to say, I cannot stand for this flag because this flag represents things wrong to me, then let that be known. And if they get fired, if they lose their jobs, if the owners get challenged, can they fire or not? Jerry Jones has said if you don't stand, you don't play. If you don't stand for the anthem, you sit during the game. Roger Goodell, who's anything but a conservative and anything but a rah-rah Trump guy from what I know, Roger Goodell has said basically everyone's got to stand for this. You do not want to be perceived as unpatriotic. But Colin Kaepernick, let me give you the full quote. He said this: I am not going to stand up to show pride in a flag for a country that oppresses black people and people of color. To me, this is bigger than football, and it would be selfish on my part to look the other way. There are bodies in the street and people getting paid leave and getting away with murder. So if you share those sentiments and you're a player, and you say, I am not standing for that flag and for what it represents, so be it. Have your convictions and then have the consequences of them, for good or for bad. Everyone that takes a stand that's unpopular suffers consequences. We all do in our personal lives, with a friend, with a colleague, in ministry, in work. Sure, we all do. And if you feel, no, that's not what I'm intending to convey, that's not my issue. Here's my issue. I'm trying to draw attention to it. Then the recommendation is find other ways to draw attention to it that don't send a wrong message. Someone whom I don't know, and I won't mention the name because I don't want to attack personally on radio and YouTube, but on Twitter, someone responding to my article about the NFL protests said, like most people have a problem with the protests, you show a complete lack of empathy, and you're also deflecting away from the root issue. Well, actually, whoever wrote that is completely wrong. I am empathetic to issues that black Americans face. I am. Do I understand them from the viewpoint of a black American? Well, how can I? I didn't grow up as a black American. I don't have black skin. So how can I fully relate? But I have enough friends who've articulated things, and I know they're not just making stuff up. And I remember, years past, Nancy and I having a discussion. She said, it's got to be hard growing up black in America. Now, some parts of America, not at all, but other parts, yes, still to this day. Obstacles and issues and difficulties that a white person won't face. That's reality. Let's keep addressing it. I felt the way Obama addressed things, President Obama, was divisive and destructive. Obviously, President Trump has been more of a divisive president than a unifying president. So there's been further fuel for everybody's fires through both of these presidencies. I understand that. So I think there are right ways to do things and wrong ways, constructive versus destructive. That's my issue. But yeah, there are issues. I'm not deflecting away from, quote, the root issue. I'm trying to say, let us look at the root issues, whatever they are, and by doing so, we can make progress together. Yeah, there are few Americans, there are a small minority on all sides that are racists, whoever they are, whatever their background, and that despise other people because of their ethnicity or because of the color of their skin or whatever. That's a small minority of Americans, and it cuts across all groups, all right? You have ultra-Orthodox Jews who are racist. You have anti-Semites who are Hispanic, who are Asian, who are black, who are white. It's all these things go in all different directions. My issue is let's major on the majors. And right now, the protests have become a thing in themselves and have taken away from issues. And you've got creative people in the media. You've got gifted spokespeople among the players. You've got coaches and owners who are people of influence. Surely, if they want to get a message out there, many good ways to do it. And they don't need me to come up with them. 866-34-TRUTH. Let's go to the phones in West Valley City, Utah. Kurt, welcome to the Line of Fire.
Yeah, I have two issues. One, I'm going to say the most important one. You haven't touched on it, but it's always been a beef for me. When Trump was was a candidate running for president, so many of the religious people on the radio kept pushing for him to vote for him simply because he was pro-life. And I kept thinking to myself, of all the bombastic things people have heard about Trump as a businessman and as a person, the one good thing is what qualified him to be the president of the United States. And so many religious people talked other religious people into doing that. And I said to myself, this is exactly how the Antichrist is going to come about.
Mm. So Kurt, let me ask you this. Let me just ask you this. Yeah, number one, I agree with the idea that a populist movement, a nationalist movement, a very strongly patriotic movement that gets too far, that goes too far, that becomes hyper-nationalistic. After all, Nazi is just short for national in German, right? So I agree that you can go so far with a hyper-patriotic, hyper-nationalistic message that you end up bringing someone into power who's a despot and a tyrant. I believe that can actually happen. No question. I agree with you. However, let me ask this. Yeah, let me, Kurt, let me ask you this. If we had been in the days of slavery and Donald Trump had been the same person as far as scandals and issues and so on, but he was a very, very strong candidate to free the slaves, and the other candidate was a strong, diehard pro-slavery candidate that even wanted to increase the importing of slaves from Africa. Could you understand religious people saying, we don't like Trump in many ways, we have concerns about him, but our big number one issue is freeing the slaves, and therefore we're going to vote for him? Because that's what we did here.
I said wisdom shouldn't be thrown out the window.
Well, could you answer my question, though? Could you see that?
You have to weigh all the issues.
Right.
Weigh all the issues. What is the better?
All right, and that's what happened. In other words, people that I know that voted for Trump, out of 17 Republican candidates, he was number 17. He was their last choice. But they knew they had to vote against Hillary. They knew that a vote for Hillary was a vote for the slaughter of the unborn and an attack on our religious rights. And they said, as much as we have issues with Trump, he's the better candidate.
You can always take votes on that. And even if she has disagreed, if America said, no, we don't want it, then that would be it. But they've already voted on it, and America wanted it.
America voted on abortion, and America wanted it? When did America vote on abortion and want it? Yeah, I see, Kurt, you're just not looking at some of the facts here. Donald Trump's baggage made it very difficult for many to vote. My wife, Nancy, struggled mightily, and to this day struggles mightily that she voted for Trump. It's not an easy decision for us to make, but we felt, given the choice, he was the better candidate.
On the program today is Dr. Michael Brown. Good to have you on, sir.
Great to be with you. Thanks.
Yeah, it's good to have you on again, I should say. When it comes to this whole idea of the marriage crisis that we're in as a culture, should we capitulate at this time? I mean, what do you think our stance should be as a church as it relates to marriage?
Yeah, this is not the time to capitulate or throw in the towel. This is the time to push back. The Supreme Court ruling on marriage, that's our Roe v. Wade moment. This is our wake-up call. Look, when the Roe v. Wade passed, there was tremendous hostility to the pro-life position in America. And we were told it's over, the younger generation embraced embraces abortion. Look at how things have radically changed. 1966, April, cover story, Time magazine, Is God Dead? 5 years later, June 1971, cover story, Time magazine, The Jesus Revolution. Things can turn on a dime. Things can turn radically. I believe that gay activism has within itself the seeds of self-destruction. Once you redefine marriage, you render it meaningless. The further this goes, the ones who are going to be standing are the ones who hold to marriage and family as God intended. So rather than this being the end of the culture wars, this is the wake-up call. This is the beginning. And I believe that unless Jesus comes first, we're going to see the tide turn.
Speaker and theologian Dr. Michael Brown. Your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Get into the line of fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
I wrote an article yesterday, Why Transgender Activism Will Not Succeed in Changing America. If you haven't read the article yet, go to my website, askdrbrown.org, askdrbrown.org, for my latest articles and latest videos. And I explained there that biological differences are too fundamental, that male-female distinctives are too real, that our culture is not going to say when you see the ultrasound, we're having a human, or we're having a child in a female body, but we don't know if it's a boy or girl. We're just not going to do that. And when the baby's born, let's name him Jordan. Let's name her Jessica. As opposed to, let's not name it until it decides what it is. That's just not going to be the dominant culture. Nor are we going to change all of our communication so that everybody has to use certain gender pronouns as people prefer, or there's a penalty. It's only going to go so far. That's what I believe. Now, some people read the article and said to me, transgender activism has already changed America. I wish you were right. Oh, I know changes have come, but I believe that the pushback will continue, that it will only go so far. If I'm wrong, we're in big trouble. We're in very big trouble, because you're talking about society that can't be sustained. When you break down gender distinctions, you just have not just sexual anarchy, but social anarchy. Well, get an email today if you haven't heard the news. Pete Williams, NBCnews.com. Boy Scouts will admit girls, allow them to earn Eagle Scout rank. This just today, the Boy Scouts of America announced Wednesday that girls will soon be allowed to become Cub Scouts and to earn the coveted rank of Eagle Scout, the organization's highest honor. We believe it is critical to evolve how our programs meet the needs of families interested in positive and lifelong experiences for their children. So evolving means that the Boy Scout, let me try this again, Boy Scouts, as in males, the Boy Scouts will now admit girls. Yeah, do you find any contradiction there, any problem with that? Well, there's another reason that ultimately, yeah, Kid Scouts, exactly, Kid Scouts. So you don't have Cubs or Cubettes, whatever. There's another reason, though, that ultimately LGBT activism will fail. Doesn't mean that we don't care about those who struggle with same-sex attraction. Doesn't mean we don't care about those who struggle with gender identity. No, we've been sensitized to that. And perhaps many of us demonized anyone gay. Well, you must be some sexual predator, or you must have 1,000 sexual partners, or you must be some terrible beast. Or you certainly want to have family, and you certainly want to raise kids, and certain demonized stereotypes of people. Yeah, we've become more sensitive. We have a family member, friend that identifies as LGBT, and we become more sensitive and understanding. That's all good. That's all great. But the fact is, there are people on a regular basis who come out of homosexuality. There are people who once identified as gay and were actively homosexual and embracing homosexuality, embracing gay relationships, celebrating them, even activists for their cause. And now they no longer identify as gay. Some have even seen their homosexual attractions dissipate and disappear and are heterosexual and happily married. Others have seen a diminishing of homosexual attractions in a way that gives them much more eternal peace, and they are very happily singles. When we come back, I want to talk to you about Coming Out Ministries, about the ultimate coming out, not coming out as gay, but coming out of identifying as gay. We'll be joined by Michael Carducci, Vice Chairman, co-founder, and a senior speaker of Coming Out Ministries when we come back.
Rachamim, compassion.
Rachamim. What does this precious Hebrew word mean? You know, we're used to images of God in the Old Testament. It says, Ish Milchama, a man of war, the general, fighting for his people, coming down, shaking the heavens, shaking the earth, the mighty creator. We're used to those kinds of images. He's the great commander in chief. And then we're also used to images that can be more tender, strong, but tender, like Adonai Ro'i, the Lord is my shepherd. And yes, he's our shepherd, and he keeps the sheep, and he disciplines us as needed, and he drives away the intruder. And then he's our father. And Jesus, Yeshua, even refers to him as Abba, which would be a tender way that a child with respect would refer to his or her father. But there's something also of God that reflects a feminine side, a motherly side, a beautifully gentle, compassionate side, to the point that in Isaiah 49, God asked this question. It's an amazing question. He says, can a woman forget the child at her breast, her own nursing child? And you'd say, no, never. He says, yes, they could. But I'll never forget you, my people. I'll never forget you, Jerusalem. What about Rachamim? Well, it comes from the Hebrew word rechem, which is the word for womb. Isn't that interesting? And it is an intensive plural, meaning it is conveying the intensity of the concept, the power of the concept, by multiplying it over and over again. Just like Elohim is an intensive compound plural to speak of God and all his majesty, Rachamim speaks of that tender love, that compassion. Human beings can have it. God demonstrates it. Think of it. The man of war is also full of compassion, a tender word that comes from the Hebrew word for womb.
Now, by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
So many years ago, when I first started interacting with people on the internet and started interacting with some gay men about religious and moral issues, and I mentioned a good friend of mine who had come out of homosexuality. They said, no, that doesn't happen. That doesn't exist. Such people don't exist. And I asked, oh, okay, what do you mean it doesn't exist? They said, well, either he's in denial or he's bisexual or he was never gay. That's the first time, this is decades ago, the first time I heard this idea that you can't change, that there's no such thing as ex-gay. Michael Carducci is ministry leader, and he addresses his history from living in the homosexual culture and being sexually addicted for over 20 years. Accepting Jesus was the beginning of a discovery of healing. The ministry comingoutministries.org, comingoutministries.org. Michael, welcome to the Line of Fire. Thanks so much for joining us today.
It's good to be here.
Michael, for how long have you heard this idea that people like you don't exist?
I bought into it. I believed it most of my adult life until I was 40 years old.
Really? And if you had to trace in your own life, if someone said, well, why did you live a homosexual lifestyle all those years? Is it something that, as far as you know, was all your life, that's who you were? Or can you say, well, I think there were elements in my life that contributed to my homosexuality?
It's interesting. At 40 years old, coming into a relationship with Christ, I said, I want to know why this happened. I wanted to know why, since my earliest thoughts that I was a girl trapped in a boy's body, struggling with gender identity, being transgender until I was 20 years old. But the Lord showed me through different research, science that I was reading, and also sermons and just talking to people individually, because there were no resources out there that I was aware of. But as I started exploring that, the Lord started to show me that there were hereditary and cultivated tendencies that were contributing to my my homosexual identity. So being transgender at the earliest age, I was surrounded by femininity. I had 3 sisters and a mom. My dad was in the Navy, so he'd be gone 3 to 6 months at a time. But when my dad was home, he was raging, angry, hot-headed Italian, and so he was also abusive. So for me, before the years of even consciousness, there's this thing called defensive detachment that happened, I believe, before I was conscious, that masculinity was either unavailable for me or undesirable. And so even before I was conscious, I had rejected it. So I liked my mom's femininity. I liked that she was soft and available to me and nurturing. So I decided that that was going to be my identity. It followed me until I was 20 years old. At puberty, the sex that is the mystery became the attraction. And I didn't know how to stop these thoughts inside my head and attractions. And so by the time I was 20, I just gave in to them, trying to follow a Christian life and thinking that maybe if I had a girlfriend that things would change, and that never did. Also, being trapped in fantasy and masturbation helped to keep those images strong inside of my mind. So at 20 years old, I came out into gay culture thinking that if I had a monogamous relationship with one man that maybe God would understand. But basically, I really was turning my back on religion altogether because it just wasn't working. But as I came into to the gay culture, I realized that masculinity was more valuable than femininity. And what I needed was male affirmation, which I found, but still not in the way that God had intended. And so the gender dysphoria actually melted away, and I was actually, at 20 years old, finally comfortable with my male parts. And I never struggled with that again. And imagine what would have happened if in my teens I would have been on female hormones and had the mutilating surgeries, and then all of a sudden at 20 years old being trapped into this what I call purgatory limbo of identity.
Yeah. And really what if you had when you were 10, started to go on hormone blockers to stop the onset of puberty and never even develop as a man as you were intended to by God? All right, so at the age of 20 then, you are now embracing your maleness, but looking for male affirmation. Now, even though you know it's wrong, maybe God will accept if I'm just in a monogamous relationship with another man. From your experience, you're not speaking for everyone, but from your experience as an out and proud homosexual man over a number of years, is there something about gay culture, or specifically gay male culture, that is different than heterosexual culture?
Absolutely. Coming into gay culture, really I wanted to settle down in a relationship with one person, but I realized coming into gay culture that there is this, it's kind of like there are no rules because society doesn't acknowledge it or whatever. The promiscuity was rampant. And I believe that there was every illicit situation that I encountered was almost like it would satisfy for the moment, but it never really gave me ultimate satisfaction. And I kind of related to Proverbs 27:7, talking about, and I paraphrase, that somebody that's had a full meal, they don't need dessert. But to somebody who's starving, even something bitter will satisfy. And all of those sexual conquests started to satisfy for the moment, but they left me emptier and emptier. And I believe that that was the driving force. And that is, I believe, the essence of gay culture, especially, well, in particular, my experience. I never found...
Yeah, let me just ask this. Now that society is more embracing of same-sex quote marriage, and Supreme Court ruled on it, and in that sense it's the law of the land, do you think that that's had an effect on gay culture?
I think that it's given more prominence to it, but I don't think it's changed the essence of the promiscuity. And I've been out of it now for 17 years, so I may not be the one to be able to answer that completely, but according to the statistics, the stats are still just as high of promiscuity.
All right, so 20 years, this is who you are. Was God dealing with you during that time?
It was amazing. amazing. At 17, I just prayed to die. I didn't want to live. I knew what was coming. At 20 years old, I figured that God had turned his back on me, so I was turning my back on him. Not able to get my religion and my identity to come together, I just walked away. And what was so amazing is it wasn't until I was 44 years old, 4 years after I was baptized, that I realized that I was angry because God didn't take my life at 17. And that was because I wasn't ready, still struggling with masturbation and fantasy. But I realized now at 44, he finally gave me the victory over the sexual acting out, the pornography, the masturbation. And I realized that it took 20 years for God to really answer that prayer. And that was mind-blowing to think that he would allow me to go that far away from him and that there would still be hope left for me. But let me tell you something, Dr. Brown, it wasn't because of my prayers. It was because during that time while I was out and away from God, I had 3 sisters that were praying for me.
Wow.
And I believe that those prayers were answered as God got me out of that environment. You know, my whole life was identified by my gay identity. I was a hairdresser and an aerobics instructor. I lived in a gay neighborhood. I drove a gay car. I had a gay dog. So, you know, it's amazing when people
what's a gay dog and a gay car? What would qualify?
It was a white convertible with cow cover seats and a chihuahua in a little pink tutu. So literally.
All right, that qualifies. That qualifies. All right, so in that sense, you lived the life. All right, so just sent a note by my producer that today is National Coming Out Day. So this is a day, of course, when people are being encouraged, young people, you know, come out as gay. But you came out, the ultimate coming out, came out of homosexuality. What resistance did you get when you began to break away from your old lifestyle?
Well, you know, the resistance that I got, I was baptized with a boyfriend and a sexual addiction. And, you know, the pastor would not have done that had he known my history or even taken the time to ask. But again, you know, God's ways are not our ways and his thoughts are not our thoughts. And I was baptized and thought that I'd come out of that water and I'd be straight, ready to marry and have kids. But as I came up out of that water, I can look back realizing that I was beginning a journey with Jesus Christ and that it was going to take time to address the hereditary and cultivated tendencies. You know, it being National Coming Out Day, I like to use that term and I think, all right, let's use it. But let's put 2 Peter 2:9 with that. Coming out of darkness and into God's marvelous light.
Yes.
Let's come out of the darkness that's been enshrouded over even Christianity now, promoting that homosexuality is acceptable to God, which goes against his word. But what it really does is it makes Christ impotent. It says that the power of Jesus Christ is not alive today like it was years ago. And let's come out of that darkness and into the light of the fact that God does change people.
ComingOutMinistries.org to find out more. ComingOutMinistries.org. Michael, we've just got 30 seconds before this segment ends. What resources will people find at ComingOutMinistries.org?
You know, we have a documentary that we just finished and released this year. It's called Journey Interrupted, and it's 5 individual stories, and there's a cliffhanger in that movie, the documentary, talking about not only the struggle, the identity issues, and what it was like to have people praying for us and pulling us out of that lifestyle, and the fact that it's God that interrupts our journeys and brings us back into wholeness. On our website, we also have multiple resources of books and DVD series that we've done on Christian television.
I'll tell you what, stay right there. I've got another question on the other side of the break. I want to present to you a unique way that you can partner together with me to reach Jewish people with the good news of Jesus, Yeshua, the Messiah. Hey, Paul wrote that the gospel is to the Jew first, but many of us don't know how to reach the Jewish people with the gospel. Can I tell you, we have a unique open door and Jewish people are ready to hear, but we need your help. When I was in Israel recently, my last hour in Jerusalem, about a dozen different people came up to me and they wanted to thank me for the impact of our message. One Jewish woman came up to me, a believer in Jesus. She said, "You saved my son's life. He was falling away. He was getting pulled by other objections to Jesus. He read your material. He's back in the faith." A young man came up to me. He said he and his Orthodox Jewish friends, here he is, I mean, with the yarmulke yarmulke, the head covering, the traditional Jewish outfit. He said he and his Jewish friends, his Orthodox friends, watch my debates with rabbis. A few years ago, I was able to lead a Holocaust survivor to faith in Jesus. He was a brilliant man, an atheist who had fled the Holocaust. He read my books on answering Jewish objections to Jesus, came to faith, led his wife to the Lord before they left this world. Friends, we have the resources. We have books ready to be translated in Hebrew to be distributed in Israel. We have our Real Messiah website, unique for reaching Jewish people, Orthodox Jews with the gospel, ready to be translated in Hebrew, ready to do internet campaigns to get into every home in Israel. Every cell phone in Israel can have this message, but we need your help. Every gift to our ministry will literally help us reach another Jewish person with the good news of Jesus the Messiah. Go to AskDrBrown.org. AskDrBrown.org, and when you go there, we will partner together to bring salvation to Israel and the Jewish people. Together, we're making a great difference.
Now is the time to reach the lost sheep of the house of Israel, to share in this end-time harvest of Jewish souls, and to find out how to receive this 2-DVD set, Predestination, Election, and the Will of God Debate. Go to Ask Dr. Brown.
Thanks again for being part of the broadcast. So the world says in America, National Coming Out Day, come out as gay, come out as lesbian, bisexual, transgender, come out as who you really are. What we're saying, my guest Michael Carducci of ComingOutMinistries.org, no, come out in the ultimate way, come out of darkness into light, come out of sexual bondage, come out of the flesh, come into the spirit, find liberty and new life in Jesus. Michael, as you've been speaking, it's clear that you have actually experienced transformation yourself, so that it's not just that you came out of homosexual identity and living with men or sleeping with men, but that you have had a change in your own sexual desires, romantic attractions. Is that accurate?
You know, it's interesting, Dr. Brown, because I'm somewhere on that spectrum, and I didn't even think it was possible. But 9 years ago, I actually had my first attraction to the opposite sex. So it's kind of like, you know, going through puberty again. But I think that when my masculinity is threatened, when I feel inadequate as a male, when I feel like that I don't measure up, that's when same-sex attraction is the strongest. And I can go to God and I can ask him, and I say, Lord, will you remind me that you made me male and that you were intentional about it? And as I dialogue that with him, he affirms that to me. And regardless of what people say or even my feelings that, you know, that cry out, you know, he affirms again, and I'm okay. And that's been this process of admitting that and surrendering that to God and experiencing that wholeness again.
So if someone says to you then, last question, if someone says to you, Michael, you're not being true to yourself. Look, you really are gay. Just embrace it and be happy and be satisfied and quit living in such inner conflict and denial. What would you say to that person?
You know, if they'd have said that to me 17 years ago, because I was in limbo on that, and it took a couple of years. It wasn't until I saw the testimony of Cy Rogers, and I thought to myself, if God could do it for that man, then he could do something for me, because I kept thinking that God was going to bless me in my same-sex attraction because, again, I couldn't change myself. But really what became apparent to me as I started to really search Jesus Christ and what he offered to me is that he didn't say stop being gay. He just said stop resisting him. And what that meant is I could never change who I was. I could never change my history or my memory. But if I surrendered those thoughts and those feelings to him, he would give me good feelings. He would restore me physically, spiritually, and mentally. And so while I may struggle still with same-sex attraction, I'm not acting in the gay culture. And so I refuse to be identified as gay. Why would I identify with what I'm trying to leave or walk away from?
So would you say that your life is massively better, more fulfilled, more joy-filled, more purpose-filled now than it was when you were out and proud gay man?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because the explanation that I have doesn't even make sense to me. I didn't think that there was anything better than a sexual conquest. And what's been so amazing is in 7 years, I haven't had anyone in my bed, and I didn't even think it was possible. But how is it that the love of Christ could actually satisfy me more than a sexual conquest? And so my life is so much better even though I sleep alone, I say to the Lord at night, I go, Lord, if I never have sex again, I'll be okay. For the first time, I actually have this satisfaction inside my heart of knowing that God does care and that he's always there. And he's the one that I say goodnight to and the first person that I say hello to in the morning. And I had no idea that a relationship, an intimate relationship with Christ was better than any sexual conquest that I ever had. I no longer have the clouds of HIV infection and all of the other emotional garbage that went with the inconsistencies and insecurities of the homosexual culture. So there is a huge freedom there. But you know what? It's something that you'd have to experience. It's not something that I can really explain.
Yeah, but the key thing, and Michael, thank you for your honesty. That's what I wanted people to hear. That, number one, you may have struggles in this area or many other areas, but that Jesus really is enough. And that in him, finding him, look, I have friends that were very promiscuous heterosexually, and they're now in their 40s, and they've been single for years, and they're enjoying the Lord, and they're blessed and happy and haven't found the right person to marry or don't feel it's time to marry. There is life, there is freedom, there is wholeness to be found in Jesus. Whoever you are, if you call out for help, the Lord is near. ComingOutMinistries.org, the new documentary, Journey Interrupted. Hey, Michael, thanks for joining us today. 866-34-TRUTH. Very rapidly changing subjects these last few minutes. Earlier in the broadcast, I talked about NFL protests and further comments and trying to be constructive, trying to be helpful. Just want to give a few listeners opportunities to weigh in. We'll start in Charlotte. Chris, welcome to the Line of Fire.
Hey, Dr. Brown. Thank you for having me. So I have a couple of questions for you.
Yeah.
I heard you earlier. I think you said that there is another way to do these protests, and I've heard a lot of people say that. And my first question is, what would that other way be? And it kind of sounds like you guys are saying there's another way to protest, as if we have ignored an invitation to address these issues in other arenas, when the opposite is actually true, where we've tried to talk about these issues and we've tried to deal with these issues in other arenas, and we've been ignored. It's been dismissed. We've even been called.
Yeah, we'll tell you what. If you ask me, let me answer because time is short. Okay. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Number one, I don't think people have been ignored. I think that issues have been on the table, and that Americans are concerned, and that many Americans are outraged over videos that they've seen and things like that. So I feel there was momentum in getting a message out, but this kind of protest is counterproductive because it makes people look unpatriotic or disrespecting of the flag. So it's counterproductive. So, for example, because NFL players are prestigious people in our society and looked to and loved by many, if there was an inner city march, I'll give an example, and you don't need me to come up with ideas, but I'll give you an example. If you got 100 of the top players of the league, along with owners and coaches, to march into a place in the inner city where injustice is rampant and people do not have equal opportunity, and say, we just want you to see, or this is the world we came out of, or this is where I grew up, I believe media all over America would want to get behind the cause. I also believe, and I've been in dialogue with some players about this, that if all the players stood, put their hand on their heart during the national anthem and said, hey, we are anything but anti-patriotic, and we want to send that message, I believe they'd be able to meet with President Trump and be able to say these are things that concern us. I believe the White House would be open for a meeting.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, the history of the country says different. So, but the other thing is this. So, Black Americans in America have always historically been held to a higher standard to love America than everybody else. We're expected to I've served this country, and historically, Black Americans have served this country in the Army and have died, but have come home to a situation where the rights aren't equal. People have died, but don't have the same rights as other people do, and it still happens to this day where it just seems like
All right, hey, Chris, hang on. I apologize for interrupting. You have a lot to say, and I want to hear it. All right? I only had a little time. If you can try to get hold of me next week on another show, I want to put you at the top of the list. I want to give you time to articulate. You have a lot to say, and I want to hear it. Fair enough? So I apologize. Out of time, but call back.
I have a quick story about a young